Amen. How many know Easter's a game changer? So if I haven't met you, I'm Chip Freed, the lead teaching pastor here at Garfield Memorial Church. So glad you're with us. So glad some of you are with us online, maybe worshiping with us during the week. We hope you feel the power of the resurrection just flooding through the airwaves and touching you today as it's touching us. Easter begins with an earthquake. Do you know that? It does shake the world. It does change everything. Matthew tells us it started with an earthquake. As an angel of the Lord descended and rolled the stone away from the tomb, and I love this part, and sat on it. All the things that could keep us hostage, he said, are so puny and so tiny. And when it happened, the Roman guards, these little paid stoolies that were supposed to be there, when that happened, they just fell like they were dead. The powers of this world fall easily before the power of God. And the women are terrified, and the angel says to them, I know what you're looking for. You're looking for Jesus who was crucified, but he's not here. Come and see, right? I heard a pastor, Tim Keller is a voice in America, a great biblical scholar that I got to know and listen to, and he passed away in 2023, and just a few weeks before he died, he and his wife did this like webinar broadcast, and some of us were in there, and he was talking about the resurrection, and he said something I'd never heard him say before. I think he just said at that moment. He said, do you know that when the angel rolled the stone away, he didn't roll the stone away to let Jesus out, but to let us in. Come and see, says the angel. To let us in on a great secret, that death is just a door, that the power of all things is not for us to be afraid of. Don't be afraid, the angel said. He is not here, just as he told you. See, the angel didn't just roll the stone away to let Jesus out. Jesus was already gone. He was on the loose like he is today. But to let us in. Step right up and learn this great secret. I mean, Jesus had been telling them, if you read the Gospels, he'd been telling his closest followers over and over and over again, something new is on the way. In fact, Lamar Williamson, a great New Testament scholar, he's an expert in the Gospel of Mark, and he said Mark talks about so much, it's like the tolling of the bell. Like Mark is the briefest of all the Gospel writers. He's barely 16 chapters, but over and over and over again, Jesus is telling the disciples, hey, bad things are going to happen when I go to Jerusalem. Bad things always do. Religious people are going to turn me in and hand me over to be crucified. I'm going to be dead and buried. But 3 days later, I'll rise again. He keeps saying it. 3 days later, I'll rise again. Third day, third day, third day. And today is the third day. And the disciples are nowhere to be found. You would think one of them would have woken up that morning and just said, you know, it is the third day. Maybe we should go check it out. But none of them do. And the women go, and you say, well, yeah, they're heroic. They are, but they're not expecting anything different. In fact, all they're doing is following tradition. They're just following religious rituals that say, you know, after the Sabbath, when someone has been buried, they go to anoint the body with oils and that, but they don't expect anything new is going to happen. In fact, you hear them on the way. Who's going to roll the stone away for us so we could perform our duties? But Jesus, the risen Christ, Easter changes everything. And the whole game shifts. And maybe if you came in today, maybe you came to church because at Easter is just what you ought to do. You're like the women. I've been in those positions of just same stuff, different day. I ought to go to church. I want to be with folk and all that. If you did that, you're in good company. So did they. But I want you to know that the angel did not roll the stone away to let Jesus out, but to let you and me in. Because Jesus at the resurrection, you know, because Jesus was raised, because of Easter, we can do way more than just believe in Jesus. Just know about Jesus. Just follow his word and try to obey it. This story, I love this story that Tisha and Tony read for us, one of my favorite readings of Scripture ever, by the way, that they read for us. These guys are broken and after the resurrection and leaving town, and I love that scripture says it. It says, while they were talking and discussing and grieving and crying and aching and complaining, Jesus himself came near and walked with them. See, because of Easter, we can do way more than just believe in Jesus. We can walk with him. He wants to walk with us. Do you know that metaphor of walking with God is the basic metaphor of the whole Bible of what it means for human beings and God to be in a relationship together, to walk together, even in creation, right? When Adam and Eve screwed up and hid themselves and shame came into the story, what does God do? He's walking in the garden, calling out to them to walk with him. He says to Abraham in Genesis 17, walk before me, right? And in Leviticus, God says, I have come to walk with you and be your God. Walking is the image of what it looks like to be in relationship with God. So we don't have to just believe and sing and worship, but we can walk. We can walk with Jesus, and he wants to do that. And it looks like three things. I know that'll shock you. But three things I was thinking, what does it look like to walk with God? First, it means to be exposed and totally accountable, which is frightening. It means to be accepted and totally loved, which is comforting. And it means to be growing as we walk with God and totally changed. That's what Jesus is after in Easter. Let's look at those. First one, to walk with God means to be exposed and totally accountable. When you walk with somebody, they see you, right? They see the bags under your eyes. They see your body language. It's hard to hide it. You can hide it in texts and emails. You can even kind of hide it in Zoom calls. But when you walk with somebody, you're who you are. You're exposed. You're known. I did a teaching right after COVID. They wanted me to lead a group of pastors because pastors were really the mental health of pastors was crazy during COVID. And they said, well, Chip, how about we have like 50 pastors. Would you talk to them and encourage them? And I'm like, yeah, I can lie. You ever had to encourage people when you're discouraged yourself? Right? That's ministry, right? But I came across something. There's a book, if you remember Mitch Albom, he wrote a book, Tuesdays with Morrie, and he wrote another book, The 5 People You'll Meet in Heaven. Well, I came across this book by Glenn Patcham, and he didn't talk about the 5 people you meet in heaven, but he talked about 5 relationships you need to have in your life. And he took it from The Lord of the Rings. I taught on this several years ago at a Monday, Thursday service. And he said, these are the 5 relationships you need in your life. He said, we all need a Gandalf. You remember the wizard in The Lord of the Rings? We need a sage. We need mentors in our lives. We need an Elrond and Arwen. They were the elvish healers. We need healers in our lives. We need counselors and therapists, spiritual directors. I have people say to me, well, I don't need a therapist. That's a really good sign you need a therapist. You know, my daughter, I always say, my daughter said, Dad, you have issues. I said, I don't have issues. She said, that's your issue. You know, we need healers in our lives. We need counselors, right? We need a king. We need an Aragon. We need truth tellers in our life. People that come and don't spin, but tell us the things we need to hear. We need peers, Legolas and Gimli, right? Where they were peers to the king, to Aragon. They're in the battle with you. And we need friends. We need a Sam. You remember Sam with Frodo in Lord of the Rings? He said, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Those are the people we need in our lives. And I have an Aragon figure here at Garfield. He's a leader of this church. He's been with me 22 years, one of the few people that could put up with me that long. But I didn't want to be one of those leaders, you know, that get into trouble with secret sins or anything else. So very early on, he became my accountability partner. And he knows everything there is to know about me. He knows the goods, the bads, the uglies. He knows stuff about me that only my wife and Pastor Terry know. He's got all the gossip. At Heritage, they're looking around the room, man. They'd love to meet him. No. But you know what we do for 22 years? You know what we do? We take walks together. We walk together. See, when you walk with people, you're exposed. And to walk with God, that's just a human being. But to walk with God, who knows everything there is about you, you can go to God and pretend, and he laughs at you. He says, I know your thoughts from afar. I knit you together before time began, before you were, I was, right? And we walk with God, it's frightening to be exposed like that and totally accountable, to be daily aware of God's awareness of me. But we need that in our life. And Jesus says, it's good. Because, look, I go through this. If I have 2 of these on the list, I'm lucky. If you have 5, you're my hero. But, Jesus said, this is great. But, did you have some of these people? But I want to walk with you. And I am the great I am. Remember with God at the burning bush? Moses said, what's your name? He said, I am. And Jesus came into the earth and he said, I'm that guy. I'm the I am. I am the good shepherd. I am the door. I am the bread of heaven come down. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am what you need me to be when you need me to be it. That's who wants to walk with you. So you need a sage? How about Jesus? They called him Rabboni. He was a great teacher. You need a healer? How about Jesus? He is a wonderful counselor. You need a king? How about Jesus? He's the King of kings. You want the truth told in your life? He doesn't say you can't handle the truth. He said, I am the truth. And if you walk with me, he said, and be my disciple, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you. Somebody say it. You want to peer? How about Jesus? Tested in every way that we are. Understands the battle because he's been through it. That's why the African slaves in America could sing, nobody knows the trouble I've seen, nobody but Jesus. You need a friend? What a friend we have in Jesus. Greater love has no one than this, says Jesus, that I would lay down my life for my friends. Sam says to Frodo, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Jesus says, I can carry it for you. And I did carry it for you. And because of that, I can always carry you. This is what we need in our life. This is who we've been looking for. So we're totally exposed and totally accountable, but we're also totally accepted and completely loved. Do you see, if I had $1 for every time I've heard this in ministry, I could pay all my kids' student loans. Like, if people will always talk to me, I'll be speaking to somebody and they're apart from church or disconnected from God, and they'll say to me, well, Pastor, first they always say to me, well, you don't seem like a pastor. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Whatever you think a pastor is, and I'm not that good. Atheists tell me I don't believe in God. I said, well, tell me about the God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in him either. But then we get around to it, and they finally say, well, this seems kind of interesting, but you know what? I got to just clean up my life a little bit, and then I'll come to church. And I'm like, good luck with that, man. I've been working on that for 63 years. I don't have that one down. But you come to him just as you are, and you won't leave that way. And you won't stay that way. Look at these guys. These are no heroes of the faith. These 2 guys on their road to Emmaus, I remember a preacher in Mississippi said they were on their way to Emmaus and they were in a mess. Any of you speak Mississippi? Yeah. They were in a mess. They're walking in a little mess. They don't have a little faith. They don't have any faith. They're done. They didn't just not go to the tomb. They got out of town. Did you hear how they talked? We thought he would be the one. Just another wannabe Messiah, right? They're done. And they don't stumble into Jesus. They don't go to some class and find God. Jesus comes to them. I don't know where you are today. I don't know what condition you're in, but I'll tell you this, that you are in no condition where God won't come to you. He comes to them where they are. He comes near and walks with them. This is what he wants to do with us. Easter says you can abandon God, but God and Jesus Christ will never abandon you. You are accepted and totally loved, even in your darkness. One of my favorite stories about Helen Keller, some of you younger people have to Google her, but I knew her growing up. She was totally blind and totally deaf at the age of 2, and she became a spokesperson. It really kind of changed the world for people with disabilities. And through Annie Sullivan, her teacher, it's a book called Miracle Worker, taught her how to communicate and speak, and she became proficient. But when she was a little girl, when she was going through this process, I think she was like 10 years old, Phillips Brooks, who was the most famous pastor in America at that time, he's the guy that wrote the Christmas hymn, A Little Town of Bethlehem, great preacher, well known. He knew the Keller family, and he wanted to go meet Helen. He heard the work they were doing, and he wanted to know if she knew Jesus. So he went there and he said to Helen, do you know Jesus? And Annie's sign language to her. And she said, no, tell me about him. And Phillips Brooks begins to tell her who Jesus is and about Jesus and how he's loving and who he is and all this. And Helen interrupts him and goes, him? I know him. I just didn't know his name. Even in the darkest places, Jesus can come near to you and walk with you. And this is what we've been looking for. And to walk with God, it means to be exposed and totally accountable, to be accepted and totally loved, but to be growing and totally changed. Jesus wants to walk with you. He doesn't say run with you. You know, he didn't tell Abraham, somersault before me. I think there's a lot of people out there thinking that to get God's attention, we have to somersault before God, right? Just, I'm going to follow God. I'm going to change my life. And you see, in 6 months, Jesus said, just walk with me, right? Walk is day in and day out. It's slow and steady. I don't care if you're from Kenya, you can't run forever, right? You can't sustain that forever. I had a guy here when we got together early on in my ministry, and he'd like to go jogging. So I go jog with him. And one day he said to me, yeah, let's go jogging and we can talk. I said, look, if we go jogging, you'll be the one talking. I'm going to be the guy waiting until it gets over, right? Doesn't say run before me. Walk with me. The slow and steady and rhythmic beat of growing together. And when people who walk with God like that, transformation happens. It happens over a long haul. They're just day by day and hour by hour, slowly turned into the image of Jesus. I've watched this happen. I want to end with this, but I studied something I hadn't, in researching for this sermon. I'm wondering, what does that look like? And I came across a retired seminary professor named Gregory Athnos. He's retired now. He taught at North Park Seminary. And he's a renowned musician, but he's an absolute expert in early Christian art. For 47 years, he's studied the art in the catacombs. That's a bucket list for me. That's one of my ones left. I want to go to Rome. I'd like to see the catacombs. You know anything about the catacombs? The catacombs are in Rome. They're where the earliest Christians who were martyred by the Romans are buried. The estimates are, the conservative estimates say there's 150,000 buried there, but some say it could be up to 1 million. Martyred people the first 300 years killed for their faith. The catacombs are like this. They look like this. They're 13 feet high. They're body buried on body, buried on body. They've excavated over 100 miles. Some say they think there's 1,000 miles of catacombs. It's sacred ground. You ever heard the underground church, right? This is where it started, because back in that day, they would go underground and worship in the catacombs because they weren't free to share their faith. And so the earliest Christian art is in the catacombs. And this guy went to study it, and he said, when I went to study it, I had two conceptions. One, it's probably very minimalist. I mean, the very first Christians were mostly poor. Great movements of God always start with the poor. And many of them were very uneducated. A lot of them, he's a descendant of Greek immigrants, and many of them were Greek slaves that were imported in Rome to be in the Roman households. They couldn't read or write. They were illiterate. They worked 7 days a week, sun up to sundown. So he's saying, how much art could they do? How much art would they have time to do? How much art do they want to do? He said, I thought it'd be very minimalist, and I was wrong. I'm going to show you a few pictures. It's amazing art that these early Christians did, for their graves. And he said, I thought that it would be kind of dreary. I mean, these are people being murdered every day. There were accounts of Pontius Pilate crucified 3,000 Christians one time in one day. Like, this is horrible stuff. In the Colosseums, being murdered for sport in front of family members. And he said, I thought the art would be kind of dreary, it'd be a little morose, he said, I thought there'd be a lot of crosses. Guess what? There's no crosses in the catacombs. No crosses. In fact, I wear one around my neck. It's kind of become the symbol of the faith. But if he studied art, and what he found out is until the legalization of Christianity in AD 313 and the subsequent Christianity becoming the religion of the empire, there were no crosses ever in Christian art. It's kind of freaky. It makes me think this is more a sign of the empire religion than the authentic religion. They didn't focus on the cross. In fact, he said there were a few New Testament images. Most of the images there are from the Old Testament because that was the Bible at the time. But there's some New Testament images. There's like the anchor. I've told you that before. From Hebrews, we have this hope, a sure and steadfast anchor of the whole soul. That's a pretty common symbol. There's also the bread and the fish. Never the bread and the cup. They don't even focus on the Last Supper because they're not thinking about the cross. They're thinking about the crown. They've moved past the cross. The cross doesn't get them in the Colosseum, but the crown does. Easter gets them there. So they have the bread and the fish. What's that a remembrance of? It's a remembrance when Jesus fed the thousands and also the meal that he had on the beach after the resurrection. These people were forward thinking. They were hopeful thinking. There was no dreariness. There was no moroseness. In fact, something happened in the catacombs that the Christians were the first to do. Do you know? They were the first ones, and you can identify Christian burial sites because they list the day of their death. That had never been done before. The Romans did not put the day of their death on their tombstone because the day of the death was the day to be feared. It was a horrible day. You didn't ever talk about the day of your death. You didn't even want anybody to remember the day of your death. That's when you became nothing. They had nothing beyond death to hope for, and so nobody did. But the Christians did. This is an epitaph there scratched into the plaster. It's by a guy named Sasquatch, who was a prefect of the church, and he was a martyr. It says down here, Deo Christo Martyrs, martyr for Jesus Christ. And it says, Annis Sanus Dias, the year, the month, and the date of his death. Why did they start recording the day of their death on their tombstones? Because of them, it wasn't a day to be feared. It was a day to celebrate. It was a homecoming day. It was a day when I go to the life that Jesus has promised me. Do you hear what they looked like as they were walking with God? And the art that they created in the tombs, like I said, most of it Old Testament. The number one art that's on the tombs in the catacomb is this one. It's where am I at? I went too far. Why is that picture not there? Somebody deleted my picture. Okay, the picture that was here, I want you to envision it. It was Jonah being thrown out of a boat into a big sea serpent. You know that story? 50% of the art in the catacombs was Jonah and the whale. Hang around 11:15, I'll fix it. But beautiful art. Why? Because remember, why is half the art about Jonah? Because you remember when they went to Jesus and they said, give us a sign? And he said, only a wicked generation would ever ask for a sign. No sign's going to be given to you except the sign of Jonah. Who did what? Who went into the belly of the whale for 3 days. And Jesus went into the tomb for 3 days. How many people here know a lot can happen in 3 days? And they said, you can throw us into the belly of the Colosseum, but the God who delivered Jonah and Jesus who walked out of the grave will deliver me. The second most common art, here's a picture of it, 10% of the art in the catacombs is Daniel and the lions. And it's always Daniel, this is the Orion position, praising God. Anytime you see the hands up in that day, it was called Orion, it was a praise of God. And look at the lions, they look like they're like pussycats. Do you understand how powerful an image this was? What was one of the number one ways that the Christians were killed? They were fed to the lions in the Colosseum. Can you imagine watching your family member being torn apart by lions? Can you imagine watching anybody being torn apart by lions? I mean, you would need a psychologist or a psychiatrist for the rest of your life. I would be highly medicated if I even saw that one time to try to get that memory out of my mind. But those early Christians weren't afraid of that memory. They say, you brought the lions after us and we laughed at you because our God is more powerful than the lions. He delivered Daniel and he'll deliver me. The other art I found in here, and this was amazing to me, I was like, who's this guy? Like, this is not biblical, and it's not. I told you a lot of the early Christians were Greek slaves. They didn't know their Old Testament that well, the Hebrew Scriptures, but what they did know was Greek mythology. And I come to find out that this is a mythological figure from Greece called Orpheus. And Orpheus appears a lot in the Christian tombs with these Greek Christians. I'm thinking, what's the deal with Orpheus? And if you study the story of Orpheus, Orpheus was like the greatest musician who ever lived. Apollo had given him a harp, and he played this most beautiful music. In fact, they said when Orpheus would play, everybody, enemy, friend, and foe, would just stop where they were. And it said when Orpheus played his music, the birds quit singing in the trees. And Orpheus fell in love, and he fell in love with a woman named Eurydice. Eurydice was his wife, and he was smitten with her, and shortly after their marriage, she died. And Orpheus says, I'm going to descend into the underworld. I'm going to go to hell to bring my bride back to the land of the living. And he goes down to the underworld, and there's the boatman, and he says, you can't come in here, you're dead. But Orpheus plays his harp, and the boatman falls asleep, and Orpheus hijacks the boat and goes to the other side. And then the three-headed dog comes along. I can't say the name. They were shouting at me at Heritage. You know the name of that dog? Yeah, what they said, the three-headed dog. I try to say that, I stutter. I couldn't say cinnamon when I was growing up. I'm not going to try to say that one. The three-headed dog, right? He comes after Orpheus, and Orpheus plays his harp, and he turns into like a little puppy at his feet, and then he ends up in front of Hades. And he says, I want my bride back. And Hades says, you don't get your bride back. She belongs to me. And Orpheus plays his music, and it warms even the coldest heart in hell. And Hades says, okay, you can have her back, but two conditions. One, as you walk out of the underworld, you have to walk in front of her. And two, you cannot look back to her, you cannot speak to her until you get back in the land of the living. And Orpheus agrees, and he begins to walk out of hell. And Eurydice appears, and she's behind him, and she sees him walking ahead of her, and she starts to call out to him, Orpheus, it's me, it's your wife, it's Eurydice. Orpheus, why won't you look at me? Orpheus, why won't you speak to me? Orpheus, do you love me? And he turned around. As soon as he looked, she disappeared. And he lost her forever. Now, what the heck is that story doing in the catacombs? If we'd have kept reading the Luke story today, it says, as they came near the village, he's walking with Jesus. Jesus walked ahead as if he was going on, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us. So he went and stayed with him. See, he has further to go. He has more to show us. But Jesus doesn't walk ahead of us. He walks beside us and with us, with a promise that I'll never leave you or forsake you. I will be with you to the end. And those Greek Christians said, we have a true and better Orpheus. Because what do we say in the Apostles' Creed? That he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, dead and was buried, descended into hell to get his bride, which was his church. And he didn't have to walk in front. And they didn't have to scream to get his attention, because at the tomb, remember with Mary Magdalene? He called her by name. We have a true and better Orpheus, said those Christians. And he went into hell to get us. And his music is the sweetest in the world. And he walks not in front of us. He doesn't say, Abraham, bow before me. He says, Abraham, walk with me. And Jesus says that to you. Let me close with the story of my grandmother. My grandmother's one of the people that brought me to faith. I'm the product of strong women. When Paul talked to Timothy and said, I know your faith. I saw it in your grandmother. I saw it in your mother. It's in you. That's my story. I only had one grandparent. I was never allowed to know my grandparents on my dad's side, and I didn't meet my maternal grandfather until after I graduated from college. Because my grandmother, what happened was, during the Depression in the 20s, my grandfather, either desperate or just bad intentions, he decided to do a robbery. And during the robbery, when he was doing a holdup back then, he actually shot and killed a man. Went to prison. Now, this was before social media and Fox News, okay? But back in that day and age, that made big news in a little hamlet called Canfield, Ohio, right? And my grandmother, pregnant with my mom at the time, my aunt was 3 years old, became a single working mother, which was no badge of honor in the 1920s. They divorced. She took off her wedding ring. She put it on her Bible next to her nightstand for the rest of her life. But she wasn't a shrinking violet. They used to tell me about my grandmother, say she's a tough old bird. And she didn't shrink with her faith. Do you know what she did for 38 years? She didn't blend with the furniture. She didn't hide behind the curtains. She was the choir director of Canfield Methodist Church for 38 years. People talking about her, lions biting at her, but she didn't care because she was going to walk with God. She was going to walk with Jesus. He was her risen Savior. I came kind of to faith. My grandmother, I would stay the night in her apartment, and I have these memories. I'd sit on her lap, and she'd play her piano and sing the hymns of the faith to me. She used to tell my mom, I'm programming him. I'd sit by her in the organ in that church. I was 4 or 5 years old, and she'd play the hymns, and she'd direct the choir. But she'd get a day off once a year. We used to do this. It's an old movie, but you might want to rent it. It was kind of cute. The choir would get a day off, once a year, and the choir director would get a day off. And we would do back then, I think I was 5 or 6 years old, but I still remember it. We'd do hymn sings. Anybody ever remember the hymn sings? Anybody as old as me? None of you. Great. Okay, I am a dinosaur. But we do a hymn sing. A hymn sing was, there's no scheduled music. You just come to church that day, and the pastor will get up before the sermon and say, hey, we don't have choir today. Everybody's getting a day off. We're going to do a hymn sing. Anybody have a hymn you want to sing? And they just popcorn hymns. And, they'd say, oh, sing this one. They'd play a few lines. And I could count on it. Every hymn sing, I just waited for it. My grandma would shout out, second or third hymn, can we sing in the garden? Here we go again. I heard In the Garden so much with my grandmother, it was like the song that never ends. But think about it. I was thinking about her when I thought about the true and better Orpheus. I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet that the birds stop their singing. That's what they said about Orpheus. And the joy and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing. And he, come on folks, walks with me and talks with me and tells me I am his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. My grandmother walked with God, and she didn't focus on the cross. She bore a cross. She was the joke of her community, but she had a risen Savior. He conquered the lions. He came through the grave, and he was raised again. Friends, maybe you walked in here today for Easter because you ought to, but you don't have to walk out that way, because Jesus didn't say, just come in here and worship me. He said, come and walk with me. Follow me. And he wants to walk with you. So remember, the angel did not roll the stone away to let Jesus out, but to let you in. And maybe next Sunday as we come to a time of baptism, maybe you want to reaffirm your baptism. Maybe you'd be baptized for the first time. Let us know. Just hit us at info@garfieldchurch.org and celebrate the new life that Jesus brings to us as we walk together with him. Don't just worship him this Easter. Walk with him today, tomorrow, and every day. And he will change your life. And that is what you've been looking for. Amen? Amen. Praise be to God. Praise be to God.